Hello, everybody. Thank you for your patience. This is the Everything Cyberpunk panel. If you are here to talk about Pathfinder 2E, thank you for coming to talk about Cyberpunk.
Yeah.
My name is Jay Gray. I am the media ambassador for our Talsorian games, so that if you have read something that we have posted online on any social media or so forth, chances are I'm the one that wrote it. The lovely Jaye Kovach.
Hi.
Yeah, one of the things that's really an oddity about Talsorian is for some reason we have like half the staff being named Jay. So we have Jaye Kovach, and then we have Jay Gray, and then we have Jay Libby, and then we have James, and then we have another editor, Jane.
Yeah, she was a Jane.
Yeah.
And then today at the booth, Jay was helping out.
Yeah, so, you know, if your name is Jay, we have a slot for you.
Jaye Kovach has the dubious honor of being our art director.
Yes.
Yes, I accept it. I accept it well.
Well, over on the end is Cody Pondsmith.
Oh, face it, you all weren't going to clap for a minute.
Yeah.
He is our general manager, in addition to being the lead developer on The Witcher, and he was a writer on the Cyberpunk Red JumpStart kit, and I'm guessing his name will end up in the credits in the core rulebook as well.
Probably.
Oh, yeah, I want to share the blame, baby.
And then finally, this is Mike Pondsmith. You can go ahead and say it.
I'm Mike Pondsmith, and I'm the guy who killed your Cyberpunk character. Or will kill your Cyberpunk character. And also, you're all breathless.
After 3 days of this, I'm sure I am.
Yeah.
So we are starting a little late because we had set up, and the transition from room to room does not always go as seamlessly as it could.
That's a fact.
I mean, the part that I'm seeing her running like top speed like a scared rabbit.
Yeah, so we're going to get right into it. Mike and Cody and I and Jay are going to talk a bit about the development of Cyberpunk Red, the JumpStart kit, the core rulebook, which is coming, future of Cyberpunk. We're then going to let Jay have the floor, where she will show you some of our amazing art, because we're really proud of it. She has done an amazing job in finding artists all over the world for the look we're looking for. And then we'll open a Q&A, and then we'll see where we go to mysterious places from there.
Very scary.
But I will say that thank you for coming to what is a 2-hour seminar. It is 2 hours for a reason. I promise you it's worth sticking through the whole thing.
We'll try to.
So,
we
yeah.
drag that other guy up there, too. The one in the back.
Well, that's
Not
later. Yeah, it's a little later.
We're good. Okay.
Okay. So for now, let's talk about the JumpStart kit.
Okay.
Why don't you start off, Mike? You did the core design.
You did.
Yeah, okay. So the JumpStart kit. The idea basically was to put something together that would lower the fear factor in original Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is a crunchy system. Back when I wrote it, crunchy was in. So we made it as realistic as we could. And that was actually a very good thing. We have police, we have military guys, we have guys who have jobs that involve large weapons who tell me I can't tell you what I do. And they all can agree that it's the most realistic system for that sort of thing. But it's not a pick it up and just run out system. So I wanted to accomplish a couple things with the JumpStart kit. One of them was, as I moved forward to make something that people could look at and go, yeah, I get this. I wanted the experience to be more fun than it was realistic. And I think we've accomplished a lot of that. I also wanted to set things up so that it would be an easy glide path into Cyberpunk Red. We're going to talk a bit more about Red as we go on, but Red is essentially the next iteration of Cyberpunk. And pretty much what we have was a war, and then we have a bunch of space things that happen in Red, and then we eventually move to the world of Cyberpunk 2077, which some of you probably have heard something about. A little bit. Yeah. So here's the point. In addition to basically setting that world up and letting people see things, we also wanted to have something that could show off some of the new kind of design concept technology. There are a couple of really nifty things in there. For example, for those of you who have looked at, the inside, how many of you have actually taken a look at the character sheets? Okay. So the character sheets use a technique which I came up with a couple of years ago, which is really fun, is character generation arrays. So you have an array of characters that, and what they've got in characteristics and stats. And you have numbers. The numbers are posted in. You roll a die on the side. Normally, your character arrays are 10 deep, but for the quick JumpStart kit, we use the 6 deep array. But those arrays are a lot more than they seem, because I actually set up and built programs that would build optimal characters for particular types of roles. So you don't just get numbers. If you actually take a look at those numbers are scaled in a way where the optimum stats you need to have for that kind of role are there. Even to the extent of one of the roles I have, that's kind of a new role, that's basically just an edge runner, street guy role, is curved, so you're kind of pretty good at almost everything. And so this was because most of the time people either don't want to take the time to nitpick all of the numbers and get them exactly where they'll be the best for that role. And they may not know how. Okay, except for my daughter-in-law, who is the world's greatest min-maxer, and who, when we have a game, man, we had all the characters, she's over to her and say, do it. And she goes, yes. She gets this unholy glint in her eye. And
She is to this day the only person I know of who has actually created cyberpunk characters on commission.
yeah.
And it should be stated that when Mike Pondsmith tried to kill them, he actually couldn't.
Yeah, it was really scary. No, seriously, she did it, and I couldn't take him down. It was tough. That's why she's banished from all my games. But Dad, no. So we wanted to set that up for one, to have characters that you can get out and play. We also decided to get rid of the paradigm of having to get all your stuff. You get your stuff. You already have it. You're going to be able to work with it from the beginning, because what's the point of having you go out, do a bunch of math, buy a gun, buy a sword, whatever you need. Have the stuff you need for your job. The other things we set up are we kind of built a life path that can be moved into rapidly. And we also, yes, he's talking about me now, isn't he? He's making faces.
Has anyone happened to seen a cord, an AV cord?
You mean that one
There
there?
it is.
HDMI cord?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Never mind.
Turns out that Cody had
Shame.
I have all the cords.
All the cords are yours.
cord.
So basically,
game.
once we get past everything, what I wanted to also do was set basically a design where people could get out and play. In some respects, what's interesting is if you actually take the time to look at things like the character gen and so forth, you can run a fairly long campaign using what we have in the JumpStart kit. If everybody wants to play a rocker, you've got 6 different variations of rocker you can use, and the odds are that you aren't going to get that many people who duplicate. You can build the systems as you need them, and on top of it, it is designed to be fairly well integrated into all the old Chromebooks and other options as well. So if you really want to, you can start building your character stuff, have your players start playing out of JumpStart, and then start pulling things together from the Chromebooks and from background, Night City, and all that sort of thing, and get a fairly solid piece of campaign. That being said, the other thing we needed to do was we needed to, in JumpStart, introduce people to the world that will eventually evolve into Cyberpunk 2077. And that was an interesting trick. I have a sort of an opposite number, a gentleman named Patrick, and from CDPR. And the two of us spent a bunch of time on the phone and emails going, okay, so if this person dies here, then, what were they doing back here? And it's like doing Doctor Who,
There were a lot of meetings while we were working on Red, and in some cases it would be kind of interesting because we would have questions that were just sort of up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd come in every morning for meeting, and I would have a question, and I would, talk to Mike about it, and the response would kind of be, I'm waiting for a response back. And so,
or vice versa. There are a lot of times
Yeah.
they're going, Mike, we need to know. I remember, how did Johnny and Alt meet? I don't know. How did this happen? How tall is Morgan Blackhand? I never thought about that. Yeah. Tall. Ominously tall. So because of that, we have a lot of history that we have to start introducing people, not just people who have played the game and know the world well, but also people who will be coming in from the video game side who really want to know more about this world. They want to know how it ticks. And this gives them a really neat opportunity to see more than they'll see on the screen and really understand what they're seeing on the screen. And we think, between us and CDPR, that's a really cool thing. It doesn't just end at the adventure. And since the world is a very deep world, it means that it needs more support so that people can really, really immerse themselves in it. So we had to go start getting all the basics of world building together so that the players who will go down that route will have everything they need to really get into that world, have a good time, play with it, and not sit around going, God, page 52, and then I add 3 + 7 and whatever.
It was actually pretty interesting because one of the things that I'm sure anybody who's gone through the world book will know, one of the things that we have towards the back, towards the adventures, is an encounter table for Night City, which was very interesting to write because it was originally, I believe it was Dave Ackerman's idea to have the encounter table in there.
No, I thought about it originally, and then Dave, who actually worked with me, Dave is one of my best friends and also one of the original Talsorian crew. And basically, I put an encounter table in, and Dave said, no, we got to build it out more than that. So Dave started just going for it.
Dave and I sat down kind of separately. We'd go back and forth, and we kind of took the original encounter table from 2020 and had this okay, everything has moved forward. The corporate war has happened. Night City has been sort of semi-wrecked by this nuclear explosion. How does that change the encounter table? What gangs are still around, and what are they doing now that they're around? Are there new gangs that are around after all of this stuff came down?
Yeah, and you had to change the zones. For example, corporate zone encounters now didn't happen because, the corporate zone was glowing in the dark. So we had to really look at the world in depth, and we felt that a really good way to get started before we turned the fire hose on in the core Red book was to introduce people to the world and the mechanics through the JumpStart kit. And in addition, we got to do cool things we'd never been able to do. We got to be able to do standees. We got to do lots of maps. Jay found us a artist who did really great character stuff, and an artist who did supremely cool maps, and then artists who just did supremely cool art, which she's going to talk about.
Even we are blown away by the level of art that we have managed to achieve.
Yeah,
Made me blush.
And the thing is that along that line, we also are trying to keep a lot of that 80s sensibility, which kind of makes cyberpunk work without it seeming like it's either too retro or out of place. And that's been, a goal for all of us on our side of the Atlantic and their side of the Atlantic, is to keep that kind of feeling that this is really cyberpunk and it's delivering what you want to see. There was a big, discussion at one point on the internet about the fact that we had daylight in 2077. And, I'm pointing out, guys, it's a dark future, but it's not always pitch black. No,
it's not literally Night City.
And we already know how to do rain and neon and all that. But what do you think's going on during the day? You can see the garbage. You can see the guys shooting at you. And we tried to translate a lot of that feeling in both incarnations, so that you realized it wasn't just cyberpunk at night when the games came out. It was cyberpunk all the time. It could be bright and sunny and still have all of the kind of weird terror, high science fiction, and yet dystopic feelings that you needed to have for a good cyberpunk game.
And if anything, the sunlight's even more terrifying. Because A, you can see what's coming at you, and that's pretty scary. But B, because I get a question all the time. They said, are you going to talk about, in Cyberpunk Red, you'll be talking about current event things like climate change? I said, we were talking about climate change back in 2020. Half the book, half of the lore is about how the Midwest is a big old dust bowl because of, global warming back then, but climate change. And that's still around, which means that the sunlight is not nice, friendly, tan sunlight. It is. You do not want to be in that sunlight because skin cancer is a 5-day cycle away of sunlight.
So everywhere is Texas.
Yeah, actually, one of the fun parts that's happening in Red, I think this wouldn't be a bad way to slightly segue, is in Red, we're looking at an arc, and we've talked about this in other interviews, is I've made the joke that basically we see Cyberpunk as kind of like the arcs of a comic book or Star Wars. So previous 2020 and that period to 2013 is Star Wars. It's very glitzy. It's flashy. You're not digging deeply into the story, but you need to know how everything works. What we're doing now is Empire Strikes Back, a deeper story with more questions to be answered. So now we look closer at global warming. We look closer at corporations and how they operate. We look closer at what happens in a world where there isn't the safety net for anything, and where it's driven by technologies that are sometimes just outpacing the people using those technologies.
Well, I think one of the interesting things, for me working on Red is that we've kind of, while the city remains. Oh, geez. While the city remains, Mike has moved forward, and we've moved forward with this sort of focus with this group we call the Reclaimers.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Who are, after Night City has been kind of wrecked, a lot of people have left Night City and actually started to move out into the larger world around it and started sort of reclaiming abandoned cities in sort of the outskirts of Night City and out further into, what was the United States. And it actually kind of lends this really interesting, It
has almost an Old West feel to it now as well. And part of that is we're now looking at that world and going, okay, if the corporation's no longer putting the boot on your head and you have the technology and the corps are kind of away, what will people do with that freedom? So it's this Empire Strikes Back is a little more along the lines of the Rebel Alliances now can do something. The Empire isn't totally in charge anymore. Likewise, here the corporations are not holding you down as hard, so you can really fight back. So there's a lot of the sense of, yeah, it's screwed up, but we're going to make more of it happen. And that's actually more interesting because what it does is it creates this point where the corporations are being savage to win that power back.
Can people see that okay? So I also thought it was a good segue for you to talk about why you're calling it Red.
Ah, okay then. So
which brings us to this piece of
you're
art.
Right, it does glow in the dark.
Can't. I don't know if we can.
Here.
Do you know how?
Well, it's wrong. It is technically.
Yeah.
Let me open up the bigger one.
Full screen.
There you go.
Oh,
there we go.
Double click.
I
double clicked.
Okay. Great.
One of the reasons it's called Time of the Red is during a period a couple of years ago, there were fires all over our area in California. I was down in California for some of my family lived down there. And Washington State also got hit by the fires. And I would get out in the mornings and you'd see slight particulate matter and the skies would be blood red. And it was utterly weird, like something out of science fiction.
It was really scary.
And I started thinking about that. I said, what if, to symbolize how much this world has been screwed up, we showed that? Well, we dropped the nuke, and we've had a couple orbital strikes.
We should really go over the depth of the orbital strikes because...
Yeah, the depth of the orbital strike. Okay. Basically, the High Riders, who are the guys who basically run the orbital colonies and so forth like that and have a base on Luna, basically decided that this was a great time to, A, declare independence, and B, not have the stupid war between Arasaka and their various enemies and sides with Militech involve them. So they settled the matter by throwing orbital rocks and artillery, which is a 10-foot-long cadmium rod that you throw from orbit at high speed, and it hits the ground and blows away like 50 city blocks. So they basically dropped stuff, nuke got dropped, normal ordnance was exploded all over the place. It was a small World War II all over the planet. And symbolizing that, I looked at that. I'm an amateur geologist, paleontologist. I looked at it and said, well, what would happen if we had that sort of stuff going on? I said, yeah, red skies. That would be really cool, like what we're talking about. And how would people relate to that? So it became the time of the big red, or the time of the red. And this symbolizes right here a piece Jay got put together for us. which symbolizes the wreckage, the fact that in America, it's bald eagle is America, baby, and that the world is still survivable, but it is also tragically wrecked, and we're going to have to rebuild it. And a large part of how Cyberpunk Red works is about that rebuilding and about the struggle for power to have self-determination versus corporate control. There are three axes that it works on. One of them is the corporations trying to return and take things over. The second axis is the edge runners, which are you guys trying to make sure they never do. And a third is the U.S. government, having watched two rogue corporations blow up a city with nukes and wreck 50 or 60 other cities, saying, that's it, it's over. And basically trying to establish their version of a kind of a draconian law and order over the surviving United States. So you're going to be entering in both Red and by de facto the JumpStart kit, a world where there is more kind of interesting struggle, where your cyberware and your brains and your weapons will basically have greater reach, because you're going to be going head to head, and your enemies are not always just able to immediately crush you. You can now maybe mess them up. I'm hoping that people will start their own corporations.
Actually, if I may jump in here.
Certainly.
One of the interesting things in going over the stuff for the JumpStart kit, one of the roles that we actually did not wind up talking about in the JumpStart kit, but we will be talking about in the core book, is the exec, who is what the corporate has now become.
Right. Yeah, we made changes in Red for these groups as well to fit that time and also to make them more interestingly playable.
And the interesting thing about the exec is, somebody who had played a corporate in the past, it was always this weird situation of basically you are sort of a cog in the machine, and you have, your own corporate overlords that you have to work for, and you can leverage a certain amount of power based on, what corporation you're working for and how high up you are and whatnot. But in Red, with the exec, it is just as likely that you are somebody who is effectively starting their own corporation, or somebody who co-founded a corporation, and now your goal is not to kiss up to your corporate masters and eventually get a higher position in a Lamborghini or whatever. It is to raise your corporation, or the corporation that you co-founded or you work for, to the level that corporations used to be, almost to reclaim the golden age of corporations for yourself.
Yeah, one of the cool parts we described it is, this time as a corporate, you're an executive is basically an evil mastermind. Or he might not be evil, but he's a mastermind. One of the things you get with that is the idea of what we call teams and teamwork. So as you gain levels and skills and ability, you will actually start getting members of your team that do stuff for you. So here's my secretary, but my secretary is leading a kick murder squad who enforces my will when I want to take over these 5 small businesses. So you're somewhat between a mob boss now and a corporate again, which is really fun.
So what we're going to do now is hand the floor over to Jaye.
Oh, okay.
And she is going to show us a few pieces of art. Many, I believe some of these have never been seen before.
This is a sneak peek for you guys, just for you guys special, because you came out and joined us today, and I wanted to make sure you guys...
Shall I just show off?
I'm showing off, pretty much. This is our executive, basically, our corporate female version. Okay. Let's see here. There we go. I wanted to also talk a little bit about that piece that I showed before. I probably need to didn't have those ready. I was just illustrating what they were talking about. But that piece was called Destroyed America. That was Neil Branchino. And he's done a whole bunch of pieces for us for this current book, including this piece, which is in the book, but is at page size. We wanted to put it in full size, but we were trying to truncate the size of those books. So we put it in small, but I thought you might enjoy seeing the kick in all of its glory.
We didn't want to actually hand you a phone book as well, because the box would collapse.
Yeah. Every piece of art could be a full page and be beautiful.
Yeah.
That we have in there.
I had them made large enough that in dots per square inch, to be able to be made into smaller posters and things like that. So you may see some prints of these things coming out, and if you wanted to let us know which ones out of the books were your favorites that you might want to hang on your wall, you should
Let us know.
and
Yeah.
I will pick out those and get those whipped up. But
And would that be something you would put on the Art Talsorian web store?
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
one of the things Jaye has done, which I love, is she insisted that every artist get credit, not in the table of contents, they're there, but on the image. Well, a lot of times what happens is you get a piece of art and to make it fit onto a page, the artist's signature gets cut off. So instead, on every piece of art, their name is very clearly labeled on a placard at the bottom corner of the art. So you know who did it, and you can find them online and
Go
see
look
their
them up
galleries.
on ArtStation.
Yeah.
Drop them a line; they will love it. Especially our gentleman who did the covers. He's a little bit unknown, and he's kind of I wouldn't say he's starting out, but he's earlier in his career, and so if he starts hearing from a bunch of fans, he's probably going to be blown away. Anyway, I wanted to talk about this piece a little bit because we had probably 7 iterations of this going along a line. If you guys are interested, I can show you those iterations. Let me. Yeah. Okay. Great. I wasn't sure what you guys would want to see today. Let's see here. Go to Mr. Branchino.
While she's looking that up, I have a question. It's something
Yeah.
I've seen happen lately with the RPG books, where they take like art and they make them a character and they kind of tell a story and evolve through the book. And I just was hoping that maybe you guys would
Oh.
There are plans.
Yeah. Do you?
Can we?
Jaye has
What was the
plans.
question? I'm sorry. I was.
Talking about using iconics in multiple pieces of art.
Oh
Yeah,
yes,
we-
I have been taking things like weaponry and tanks. Yes, there's a cyber tank. There's a cyber tank. You can blow shit up. Anyway, sorry. And I've been giving them to the artists and saying, hey, why don't you put this tank over here in the corner? So if you look through, you will see different characters and different pieces of art, and you will also see different weapons and the tank in different pieces. So you should just keep an eye out because you won't even see the original piece of the gun illustration until the core book comes out. But I've already got it in the JumpStart.
Yeah. One of the things we try to do is to utilize pieces that link together and tell stories,
Mhm.
and have characters that do show, a central theme, whether it be a particular weapon or a particular place or time. Another thing we've been trying to do is build in with our quick start characters and so forth, a sense of like they are real representatives of the roles that they take on. And that was because when I first did Cyberpunk, characters like Johnny and Morgan were there really as example characters of what was going on. But, we didn't think in those times, somebody should actually do more background on this guy. This time through, because we saw that you as players wanted to see more, that we would make that front and center. Here's what they're doing. Here's their stories. Here's their background.
In that sense, I'm sorry, just jump in. Is
Mhm.
there any chance of going further outside of the red timeline and going further back? And I'm specifically referring, if you're bringing up Johnny Silverhand to his time in the South American Wars.
Oh my gosh!
No comment. That's all I can say.
Great
Show,
question.
show us the art, Jaye.
Yeah.
Okay, so as you can see, moving on.
Okay,
As you
we'll
can
get
see
that.
here, there's a lot of changes from the original. I would get up and point, but I'm a little wobbly today. So you can see that he's kind of blocked out his face, or the woman's face who's doing the kicking. He's blocked it out. He had her barefoot. She's got different clothing on, and I love the cinematic approach to this. This just felt so like Hong Kong cinema to me. I was really into it. So I really wanted to work with him on this and bring it along to something better. As we slowly but surely make our way across to a new piece, you can see that there's a ton of atmospheric effects, a lot of glow. There's a whole bunch of really big slashes of rain, and it disrupted the piece. I saw what he was going for, and it disrupted the piece just enough until we finally came to where we have it. So it's just, you can tell it's raining heavy. You can actually see the splash marks of the rain off of her knee and his face. He looks like he's shorting out a little bit. Maybe some water's gotten inside of there. He's made this glow of the neon sign behind really be the focal character. It's actually the main character in the piece because it's lighting everybody. I just thought it was such a great approach.
The other thing is that it has a certain kinetic energy. And what we've tried to do in all the art is, since we're telling a story about a world, what we've aimed for is to make it look like pieces out of a film or an action movie rather than static pieces. So
Yeah.
except for the character pieces, and even the character pieces are shown doing what they do whenever possible, we've tried to make it look like we took a slice out of life. People were doing things on the street, they were getting involved in something, and that might play up against something else. For example, we have a piece where we have a woman, beautiful corporate woman, standing in front of a car and drinking fine wine and all that. And then later, if you look in one of the other pieces, you see she's in a commercial because you see a video board with her and the advertising.
Yeah, it's an advertisement. I coined a phrase while Mike and I were talking. It's everyday cyberpunk. That's what we really wanted to how would you live your life? How would you do your dishes if you had some sort of technological advance to get those done? And there are some pieces that I have planned out for the future that are things like a child and his mother are washing dishes. What does that look like? And how in the future is that going to look? Someone crossing the street, someone waiting for a bus. We wanted to see how we brought in things like, mecha, because mecha's coming. It's not a mecha game, but there's going to be robotics in this that are more everyday. You're not just going to see them in a factory or in a high-end school like MIT. You're going to see them in your daily life. And how is that going to look? So there are mecha that are for hauling things. There's mecha that help you build things. And they're very transitional. They can move and shape into other things, other types of tools. Not like Transformers, but more like other kinds of tools that will help you. Okay, it's a digging tool now. It's a hauling tool now. And this is some gentleman who owns his own business that's doing construction, and it's just a small little business. This is the piece of equipment he can afford.
The John Deere of the future.
Yeah.
Except this time you know how to hack it, so you can actually repair
Exactly. There's also the hacking. So.
it. Another thing that reflects in up at the 2077 level is we want to see everyday cyberpunk there. So one of my favorite images in one of the trailers is there's a kid with a holographic set, and he's shooting a gun and doing stuff. And if you know more about how net running works, you realize that net runners are wearing very, very similar kinds of setups where they're projecting the areas of the net into their reality. So for this kid, it might not be he's in another world. It could be he sees that world in where he is.
I want to show you this piece is actually in one of the books.
Oh, I haven't
But-
seen
Yeah.
that piece in full.
No, I haven't
No,
either
that's
yet.
gorgeous.
I'm going to wobble over there, so just give me a second. In the book, we only see her from here to here. And what we can see here is this ancient, by then it's absolutely ancient piece of technology from the late 70s that she has actually jacked into.
I programmed my
She's a
first game on
musician,
that.
And she's playing this piece, using this piece for her musical creation. And it's something that she's created on her own. She's jacked into that, and I just love that. This reminds me a lot of people now with record players being
Polaroid
DJs,
cameras.
Yeah.
right? Or old school cameras.
Yeah, I want to touch on something too. One of the arc things that goes on in Red is because technology is not just down there in the supermarket. You can't go to Best Buy anymore and get it. You have to make do, and you have to package and make new ways of
bash.
doing things. You kit bash. And we talk about kit bash cyberpunk as well when she and I are
Yes.
discussing it. The idea that the street finds uses even for the old things
And
that
this
are out
was
there.
so exciting to me because I'm Romany and my people make do. We will, use jars for glasses and all that kind of stuff. And so that was just in my head already. That imaginative thing was already there.
Yep.
So it just let me sort of free my mind into an even more open technology.
And graphically, what we're trying to do is set some stuff up to work forward into the later end of the timeline by setting it up so when you see a thing that shows up in like 77, there are echoes of things that might have been started back in 45. And then they're realized in the end when you see that in the video game as well.
I'm going to go through this. I was going to go take my time and explain it, but I'm going to go through this cover piece called Cab Hail. I'm sure everyone's seen it by now with the blue chick in the front, right? I'm going to go through the roughs, and I'm going to tell you 73 emails and an entire month working every single day to get this cover right. That's the kind of dedication that we have from our artists, which is very, very stunning. This is the first rough sketch.
Yeah, what we love is there's stuff that we're doing for roughs that, many people would just go, that's my cover. And we're going, no, it's not good enough. This has got to be awesome.
This is the first actual sort of real sketch. And what he was trying to do here was put her in place as the star. And I said, no, the city is the star. She's just existing in it. So then he started thinking about this a little differently. And that's when we started getting some shape to our artwork.
Yeah, because Night City has effectively always been the major character.
Absolutely, yeah. And so here we come along, and now we're really starting to get something going here. Of course, Arasaka has sort of been not seen for a while, so we do some things to fix that later. But we've added in flying cars and some atmospheric effects. Now he's really getting the neon, the lights. He wants it dark.
So Arasaka just vanished.
Arasaka just vanished, and we tried several different different things to that space. As you can see, this upper left corner where it's really black, we fought with that for a while, and he's eventually brought in, some of my feedback. Sorry, Anselm. This is Anselm's Zylonka, because I haven't mentioned it. And then we kind of ended up in a place where we were trying to decide what to put there. And I think, what did we decide? Microtech, I think, ended up there.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I just wanted you to see the transformation all the way through.
So we're gonna turn on the lights again, if someone could do that. And then we're gonna open the floor to some questions. We're going to make it clear right now we cannot talk about. We're here to talk about Red, not 2077. So please, let's ask some questions about that. We'll do a few, and then we'll move on to the next portion.
Question.
Okay.
Through the development cycle of Red that we know about,
Yeah.
we've heard a number of comments on the timeline.
Uh-huh.
You just mentioned 2045 specifically,
Yeah.
but we've also heard that Red will kind of have its own timeline to kind of cover after the fourth core, but we're up to Red. Is that up to 2045? So are we still going to have some of that content in the core rule book to say 2030 to 2045?
Yes. What happens is history doesn't disappear just because you're at the end of a historical arc. World War II, we didn't get to the end of it in 1945 and say, yeah, what happened in 42? So we had to pick a place where we were launching from, and it was actually important to be able to look back into that history because some things wouldn't be interesting yet. For example, during the period of 45, a lot of the reclaimer movement has begun to reclaim those cities that had been deserted and wrecked in the collapse and then post-war and all that. So they're more interesting because of that point. Nomads, for example, now have transportation systems, and you can get in a caravan and go out to, a city that was deserted and wrecked and fight boosters and deal with what you got to do. If we did that earlier, that hadn't gotten there yet. There wasn't probably a road to work on. So my concept on it was kind of like the American West after the Civil War. Everything's wrecked in one sense, but there's all this possibility in the other sense, and it's going to take a fast gun, brains, and a lot of grit to do it.
There will be, as we have in the starter kit, there is a timeline, and to my knowledge, we will be talking about the Red Era a lot throughout the core book.
What we do in the core book is I talk a lot more about how we get to places in the final 2045 wrap-up period. But we have to have a place where you guys start, and 45 ended up being, that was the point.
Okay. We'll go back to the gentleman with the longish hair and the gray beard.
Yes.
That is an awesome, but the mustache is better.
Given the significant amount of change that occurred in the world post-Fourth Corporate War,
Yeah.
and all this beautiful, fantastic art that we have, is there perhaps an inkling of you guys and some of the preset adventures or some of the world books having a throwback to classic dungeon crawlers with player
Oh, these characters are going to be popping up within not necessarily handouts, but we're going to have online stuff so that we can keep the story updated. I'm actually working out some ideas for some sequential fiction as well. And the idea is that you're going to be able to track certain people or stories as I see them that people drift in and out. There's one very critical storyline through the Nomads and how that expands, which takes place air, sea, and space. There is another line which is basically what happened to the corporate and solo communities because they had been bound in together. And when you suddenly is a guy who kills people for a living and there's nobody telling you who to kill.
What does a soldier do when there's no war?
Yeah, basically. And particularly if that war is a covert war. So what we're doing is within the arc, I like to think if we're doing a comic book arc, what was maybe Avengers, or something like that. If you're doing that, there are all these small sub-movies in there, before you get to Endgame. You've got your Iron Man arc, you've got, your Thor arc and so forth. So we're trying to fit those in, and that's one reason why we have an end point at 45, so we can start talking about some of those stories.
Okay, next question.
People like
We're
stories.
going to go here and then there.
Okay, so I'm going to go to a Star Wars analogy, I guess. So one of the things that justified the prequels with the Star Wars, why it looks so nice versus on the Age of the Empire, is there's sort of this degradation from that golden age. Now, in 2020, we're kind of seeing this like technological, really it was a gilded age, it wasn't actually golden age, made it look that way. And you're talking about the destruction of Arasaka, the Militech war, all this. How's it going to affect cyberware now that all these corporations have gone to war, some have gone, some are down the hill?
I can actually answer that, and I'll answer it by saying you can now go out and get the STL files. I am tired today. Been up too late, doing too much trouble. But basically, you can get files to get your kid a really good prosthetic arm.
Okay.
Stuff is knowledge. Knowledge makes stuff. And the beauty of a technological society is that that stuff has a tendency to hang around. I can go on the internet now and buy a radio I had when I was a kid. It didn't go away. It didn't disappear. I just have to have the knowledge to find it. So what happens in the red period is technology and technological and sociological expansion have been controlled by the corporations. Think of them almost like nobility. Nobility didn't want you to have everything or you might become a problem and dangerous. This would be sort of like Europe after the Black Plague. The nobility has been kicked back. Everybody's been kicked back. The trade routes have been messed up. And basically, if you're due with a sword and an attitude and you really want to get something done, you could have gotten something done. You could become king. Here, you have the same opportunities. And the technology is there in bits and pieces. And now you go to your tech and you go, I've got 3 or 4 things here, 2 or 3 things here. I need to get new weapons. And I can't go to Militech to get new weapons. But I found a container that had some military weapons partially built. What can you do?
I think the other interesting thing, which I'm not sure how much we're going to get into it in the core book, but this is definitely probably something for supplements, is that another big change is that, as Mike stated, you can't really go down to the mall and get any of this cyberware anymore unless you find a non-looted store in the mall and break in. So a lot of your access to cyberware is based on making deals, finding old cyberware, looting bodies that you might find after the conflict that haven't been cleaned up after the war or whatnot. And the one that always seemed most interesting when we were discussing was the fact that a lot of the new technology coming out and really kind of hitting the streets is a lot of sort of, I suppose, designer tech, as you describe it. Like a guy in his basement figures out how to build a really interesting cyber weapon, and now that person is the only one who knows how to make that weapon.
Yep. There's something.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's there's a picture. This is something we discussed before. There's
Small
a
batch
picture we
cyberware.
didn't use.
I like that term.
There's a picture we didn't use in the JumpStart. I think we're going to use it in the core. There's this guy, and he's got this arm, and it's an ugly, janky arm.
Yeah.
It looks like, and I'm in my head. This is the story. Is
It's just
he went
like
to some
Kmart,
old
yeah.
factory, pulled the robot arms that assemble cars. He grabbed one of those and took it to his tech and said, "Put this on me."
It's almost like a dystopic progression of the maker-hacker community.
Oh yes,
Yes.
The maker
Yes.
community was a big influence in what I did in Red, because I love the idea that people found and repurposed all the time in that. The other thing I wanted to look at was alternative economic communities. Not everything is necessarily economic Bitcoin, but barter does exist. We just don't see it. So I looked at societies in Eastern Europe after the wars over there and so forth, and said, people were not saying, "Hey, give me a gun, I'll give you a chicken," but there were barter systems. One of the things that really fascinated me was, I don't know how many of you have ever seen it, but there's a book called 98% of Everything. Anybody know it? Read the book. It's amazing. 98% of Everything talks about containerization, the idea that most everything we have goes in the middle of those big containers you see on the trucks and things. That was a tremendous change in worldwide culture. And it meant that this microphone could be made and could be done cheap, because you could take the pieces from around the world and assemble them in other places in the world that are cheap and move these enormous containers full of them cheaply, and thus get high tech and really good stuff for, just a fraction of the costs. But what it also means is that you now have ships that are the size of small damn cities that are carrying, TEU units, transfer units of containers that are, 2 containers would fill this room. But they're carrying, like, in that container could be 10,000 pairs of shoes. It could be 100,000 something else. You have cars, and they're refrigerated containers. All that stuff is moving all the time. We don't see that. But when we opened that up as a part of the architecture of Red, what I asked was, okay, if you have all the containers, there's a war, and you can't get a container ship out of Singapore Harbor, who's going to go for it? Who's going to steal it? Will you try, and will it get sunk? Will it still be there when the war is over? And will anybody, if the corporations involved went down, even know it's on the damn manifest? So there is
like storage wars.
Yeah, it's storage wars. It is. I'm thinking there's billions of these. I remember talking in an interview about this, and I said, you may not get a new cell phone very often, but last year they made 3 billion cell phones between all the companies. There's 3 billion cell phones out there. So I'm sure I can find a cell phone if I know where to look.
Okay, one last question over here.
Now, as we know, in Cyberpunk 2020, the corporate kind of balance between the law and chaos of the combat zones, and not many of those dangerous gang members ever enter Night City out of fear of corporate.
Mm-hmm.
But now, since the corporate zone's gone and got nuked, are we seeing more dangerous gangs entering Night City? And if that's
What you want to talk about it?
Cody's jumping to
Cody, do it.
Well, I want to talk about Max Hammerman, because
Oh, yeah.
Max Hammerman is my personal hero now.
Yeah.
So
Max Incorruptible
what
Hammerman.
What we see, and we talk about this in the World Book, is that basically after the corporate war, basically sort of the society in Night City goes down, and the police fall apart almost entirely, and most of the corporate cops fall apart. A lot of them have died in the corporate war. So yeah, you see a lot of encroachment from the combat zone of just, gangs, underground organizations, things like that, basically starting to move into what was previously sort of the nicer parts of Night City. And the turnaround on that, correct me if I'm wrong here.
You're right.
I wrote part of this section. The
You're right.
turnaround on that is that Max Hammerman, the chief of police
For the Night City SWAT,
for the
effectively.
Night City SWAT, basically goes around with Max Tac, C-SWAT, the guys who fight the cyberpsychos, and basically over like several years, basically starts clearing out most of the sort of center of Night City, hiring hiring sort of the private solos who people have brought in to protect their neighborhoods, incorporating territories, and basically building Night City SWAT back up to the point where in Red, it is actually fascinating that Night City PD is the only public service in Night City that is provided across all of the districts of Night City, which all run independently, because Max Hammerman has created the Night City PD again, but even meaner, and they're effectively almost a weird sort of police state, but they're a police state to keep things in
exactly.
control.
The way I look at it is, if Elliot Ness had to declare martial law in old Chicago, I'm doing this for your own good.
So yeah, there was a gang war, and the cops were a gang, just like everyone else.
They were just the toughest gang.
They were the gang with the best guns, and they got to win.
And they took a lot of the military hardware too.
But we do definitely see a lot of gang activity. Going through and writing the encounter tables. We are still seeing a lot of open gang conflict in the streets. NCPD will show up to take care of it, but you will still run into all-out, shootouts in the street.
You still see the bozos.
Yes.
No, you won't see them.
Well, okay,
but you'll hear them.
You'll hear.
Okay.
I have to admit, one of the things I really loved was, and he's to blame for it, is at one point we were looking at Red and people were talking about the gangs of Night City, and it went, oh, God, a clown gang. I'm going to have a stupid clown gang. And he described our favorite bozo scenario, the bozo catching you in the elevator. And at the end of it, people were on the Reddits going, crap, I hope I never see bozos. We suddenly had like an explosion of clown fear.
Yeah, it was great. I think it was something along the lines of, I think first you're trapped in there for a few hours, and then they put in the bugs. And then once you're knee deep in the bugs, then they put in the water. So now you're in the water with the bugs. And then they electrify the water. Not enough to hurt you, just enough to make you
and have the boats get crazy and try to climb on you to get out of the water.
It actually gets worse from there. And then when it's all done, you're not dead. They open the doors and let you everything floods out with you in it. And they come over and they hit you in the face with a pie.
Yeah. What scares me is that my lovely wife and his mother invented the bozos. So, and I looked at it, and she used to look over. She's writing this. She'd say, "Very sneaky, bozos is," and this maniacally crazy voice.
We've got the bozos. The Inquisitors are still around, trying to take your cyberware by force where possible.
You'll be happy to know the Gilligans are still around.
Yes.
Slaughterhouse?
Well, we're done with questions for now. Any gang you want is there, though we only named a few in the JumpStart.
Yeah, and we're bringing new ones in that are more apropos to that situation, because now we can talk more about road gangs and the things that the nomads, for example, outside of the city used to be hell on wheels. As the nomads got more power, the nomads out there with a group of people, and they go, hey, we have jet planes now because the military base went down in a gas attack. Yeah, let's go hose these guys, clear the road. Yeah. So you see more interaction that way, which is fun.
So we're going to stop here for a second. And then we're going to say, so we said we couldn't talk about 2077 or answer questions about 2077. That changes right now.
Here it comes.
Come on down.
Come on down. So you remember I said I had a counterpart over at CD Projekt. This is Patrick Mills. And Patrick and I have spent more time than we know what to do with sitting on the phone, on emails, and talking when I'm over there, or when I can drag him out here, figuring out how these worlds go together and what we're going to do to scare the hell out of you. So he's going to be here to talk a bit about stuff, and he has this whole list of what he can't talk about.
Which is very long.
Yeah.
Very, very long.
But see, you got to understand, if we told you, it wouldn't be as much fun. You go, oh, yeah, that again.
We are going to get to a Q&A. You can ask questions. We do not promise Patrick can answer.
Yes.
Yeah. So please, everybody sit down, guys. Have a little water. So what we're gonna do start with is, there's a lot of interviews about 2077 out there. In fact, there've been a flurry of them since E3, and videos with designers of all kinds answering questions and talking about their favorite parts. There's been descriptions of the demo that took place there. You're all gonna get to see it. early September, and I'm hoping that's what I believe it's.
Yeah.
And we've seen the trailers and the big reveal of Keanu Reeves. So I thought maybe you'd like to talk about how 2077 and Red and Mike and Patrick and the CDPR team work together, and that's all up to the two of you.
Yeah.
So we'll do that for a bit, and then we'll go to questions for.
I've been
Patrick
talking for a while. You should do it.
Sure, no problem. So I guess we've been working together now. Us two have been working together now for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
Working on sort of making sure that 2020, Cyberpunk Red, and 2077 are all part of the same story, and they're all telling the same story about this world, and specifically about Night City, but the world as well. And it's been a really exciting process. Bringing you in and putting us together, I think, was a really good move, and it's been really nice. I think we work well together.
I have a good time hanging
I
out,
think so,
except
yeah.
when you call me up at 6 in the morning. Then you become a not favored person.
Fair enough. That's
Yeah,
true.
one of the things that we really liked about it, and we realized fairly soon on, was we had the option we could do it as a separate timeline. Here's one and here's the other. We really didn't want to split the streams because we didn't want to have kind of competing universes. We dealt with that with Witcher, and he hates that right now, having to figure, is it in the book? Is it in the game? Isn't that really, really bad German TV show that we don't talk about? Yeah, it was bad. And so we realized there was another thing came with it, is that if you're going to do a history, if you're going to do a world, and you're going to license the world, do the world.
Mm-hmm.
But there was this problem is, if they did 2020, everybody would be sitting on here going, Cyberpunk 2020. Yeah, okay, right.
Yeah.
It's next year. So we wanted to spread the timeline. And as we did that, we realized, hey, there's a lot of stuff we could fit in to get to that part of the timeline again. Mm-hmm. And we can use a lot of the things that we have already written as a jumping off point. And then we have time travel. So Patrick can come up with something crazy and call me up and go, well, would it be cool if we did this?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll go back and go, yeah, but, that would take about 5 years for that to get together. And to go, well, so could you have it happen here?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll go, yeah, okay, we'll fit it in over here. And how about, I'll call him up and go, how about if we did this character and we want to ask what they did 50 years from now?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that helps us is Cyberpunk's, if you've got the money, you can get your heart replaced, you can get all kinds of stuff fixed. I sat down one evening and I went through all the mortality figures and information I could find. And I figured out, most of what kills people, particularly as old age. And I went, oh, that's not a problem anymore. That's not a problem anymore. That's not. So by the end of it, I realized, technically Johnny, because he has the money, could live to be 120 or 130. And up till 100 or so, he kind of look about 45. And he could get away with it. And we're almost there now. I mean, my in-laws and older in-laws, I look at them and I look at little old people versus my in-laws or my cross the street neighbor who can bench press me and he's 70.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, so how'd you do that? Take care of myself. Yeah.
The secret to life,
So-
taking
Take
care
care.
of yourself.
Well,
And I'll take care of you too if you ask me again. Oh, crap.
And I think you all know about Keanu Reeves is playing Johnny Silverhand, and we don't really want to talk about too many details. There will be more to know later, but
Keanu is 50, okay?
Yeah, but he's not the only. He's not the only character. You can expect to see a few others from the Cyberpunk 2020 era coming forward, and you're going to find out what they've been up to, and it's fun. It's nice.
And it's really fun because what will happen is we'll sit down and we'll go, okay, we know what they're doing over here, but what did they do for the last 10 or 20 years?
Exactly.
And people have started businesses. They've, we have feuds that come forward,
Mm-hmm.
but we also have stuff that happens in the future that I get to go back into and lay the track down into the past.
So Patrick,
Mhm.
can you tell us a bit about, without revealing trade secrets,
Mhm.
the story process?
So the story process at CD Projekt, we actually have we actually have a quest team and we have a story team, and they sort of work together to put things together. The way that I think of it is like the story team, they handle dialogue and characterization. The quest team handles the actual plotting and the moment-to-moment experience of the game. And so what you'll have is you have the story team sort of put together like, okay, this character is going to go on this journey, and this is what's going to happen to them, and things like that. And then the quest team goes and breaks that down into little playable bits, usually 30 minutes to a few hours, and creates little micro stories in between. And when it comes to using 2020, we have all this wealth of source material for it. And so our story team and our quest team, we went through those books. We pulled out all these ideas and all of these characters and other things that we could use, and sort of constructed something out of that.
And then what happened is I've transitioned, because when I started, I worked a lot with the story team. So there were actually, sessions where I would be sitting there as described in a motel somewhere or hotel somewhere with a whiteboard, and the story team guys out, and we're going, well, this happens over there. What if this character did this? What if this happened in Night City? And we would build a framework. One of the biggest transition things we had was for the lead studio manager, I guess he is now, is Adam. Yeah, Adam.
Adam. He's CEO and game director.
Yeah, he keeps getting promoted. I keep looking up. Adam, you've got new stuff. I have to give you another present. But what was interesting is Adam and I sat there and we had this big world plot sweeping thing. And I said, but Adam, the thing about Cyberpunk is that it's always personal. It doesn't matter how big it is. There's a personal element. And he kind of went, okay, I got it now. So next thing we knew, we could go back to the story team and go, okay, so personalize this more. And from there, we were able to build an evolving plot line that shifted me over to more of the quest team and Patrick. And Patrick was able to take the thread we had started and just run with it and get the rest of the quest team on board.
It's been really nice. It's been really good. One of the things that's been really fun too is we'll have issues where we'll without revealing any details, we'll have issues where we'll be going through the story and realize that there's actually an issue, like actually it says in this source book that this character, something went with this character and they did this other thing, and it's incompatible now. So I'll call Mike up and we'll figure out okay, this character can't do this. So let's try to find another character that can do this.
The same thing,
and we'll find that character. And then by doing that, because we're pulling from the source material, we actually sometimes find a character that works better for the thing that we were doing in the first place. And new story bits come out of that, and you get a new take on it. So you have a character and you want him to do this thing. It's not going to work. Talk to Mike. We find a new character, and then we realize, actually, this is better than what we had before.
And what's really interesting about it is that sometimes what will happen is we'll have a problem with the timeline or something like that. And, Patrick will call me up and say, okay, so we've got this problem that we had to, and I'll go, I already planned for that a while back. So, for example, the questions of what happens in Night City after, the bomb goes off. I said, yeah, I already figured out how we were going to deal with this, and I know how they evacuate the city, and I know who goes where, and I know why they do this. And, for example, you'll see the maps are different between things, but I had already started figuring out how to move things around, because I said they can't live in a corporate zone anymore. So we shoved a bunch of stuff into the bay, we moved it, we restructured it so that eventually we could get something closer to where he was, and also get me something that would work really well for a post-Holocaust version of Night City that would one day be there.
And you'll see, actually, when you play 2077, you'll actually see a lot of how the city has changed since 2020. And you'll see, you'll go to a place, and again, I can't do too many specifics, but you'll go to a place and you'll see the history of that place unfold. You've probably heard, if you've been paying attention to the game stuff, the demo, the gameplay demo that we revealed at E3 takes place in a neighborhood called Pacifica. And if you go back into the books, you read about Pacifica in the books. And then when you see the full game and you sort of learn the story of what happens to this neighborhood, you realize it's a continual story from 2020
all the way
to
through
2077 that tells, this is a coherent story that tells you what here, and you see it in the art, you see it in the characters that live there, you see it in the story. So it's really exciting.
And it's really interesting also because for me, I get to see a lot of these things realized as places. I worked on Matrix Online a bunch of years back, and I remember that was one of the best parts about that was that you could wander the city and go do stuff. And we had problems. I was working as a game on lead for the massive multiplayer side, and I had problems getting the guys who were doing missions to stay on focus because they go, well, we went out and we watched the sunrise because we had a time cycle in the thing, we did these things. I'm going, I know it's all cool, but we can't use it, because it's subjective. But watching the city that you've talked about and seeing the realization of it and going, did I communicate this to everybody back in the team correctly? And here's what they saw. And yeah, that actually works pretty well.
Jay? I think one example of this we can talk about is The Rock.
Yes.
And there's some very specific stuff about The Rock in Cyberpunk Red. And because if I recall correctly, in 2020, it's not there.
Well, it's buried.
It's buried. So no, it's not on the maps.
And
then when we saw the demos in 2077,
okay. So the location of Night City is, of course, based on the real Morro Bay, California, and we have a location. We have a location in our game that actually takes place that's sort of out in the bay, and we were actually looking at the map and we were talking about the map and how it works. And Mike says, well, "Is this the rock? Because there's a landmark rock."
Big. It's
a huge
it's what's called a basilisk, and the basilisk basically is just a solid volcanic plug, which is really weird for the area that's mostly like sand and crap.
It's on Google Maps.
It's a real thing. It's a really strange thing because it doesn't belong there at all. And we had actually taken the location of the rock and we had turned it into a specific location of the game, which I'm not sure if I can talk about the specific location, but we turned it into a specific location. And Mike said, well, actually that works because of what he had set up in Red and in 2020. So.
Yeah, and in 2020, what we'd set up is that area. The biggest problem with the 2020 maps is we never did a topo map of 2020, so it's all seen. It's like if you look at San Francisco maps, San Francisco looks flat. It's not flat. If you look at Seattle maps, it looks flat. Seattle maps. I once was laughing at Jordan Weisman, a friend of mine who did Shadowrun, and I said, "You have people doing car chases down this particular series of streets in Seattle. If you did that for real, they'd be airborne." And he's going, "I didn't live in Seattle then." I'm going, "Yeah." But what you don't see is the fact that the elevation, the end of Night City and the park actually go into the rock. The rock was covered as fill to anchor the city. So by the time we're doing it in Red, we're moving that fill to cover up the big hole in the corporate zone, and the rock gets uncovered. And then he has the rock.
And so then we take the rock and we turn it into a different location.
And we do cool things with it.
Yeah, exactly. This is the kind of cooperation that we've been doing, and it's really fun because even though we're in totally different time zones, which is why I sometimes have to call you at 6 a.m.
But I get my vengeance. You're headed out the door to go home, and I'm going, "Hey, Patrick, we got to talk."
I wind up staying till 10 o'clock in the evening, so it goes both ways. But yeah, it's really neat, and I think that we're creating something really cool.
It is amazing.
Yeah.
People ask me, how do you feel about someone actually doing a video game of your idea, your dream? And I go, I'm not really, it's not like somebody else is creating it. It's like they let me join in and we're doing it together. And the end result is something that I don't have to go, gee, how did you do that? I go, we made this. And I love it because in a lot of ways it is the same thing as the process at Talsorian. You guys always give me credit for this. I write some of it, I write pieces. But for every book we ever did, there have been really talented people at Tal who contributed, wrote things, looked at my math and said, "Holy shit, Mike, what are you thinking?"
James
James and I spent a really long time testing the red box.
Yeah.
Cody called me one time and said, Jay, James and I have just been standing, had our characters stand 5 feet away from each other for 15 turns with heavy assault rifles just pounding away at each other, and the math's not quite adding up, man. And I don't know what to
Nobody's
do.
dying.
Yeah.
It's like there's not enough blood.
And I'll look at it and go, okay, I wanted to have this happen, in terms of this part of the math word. But yeah, you're right. That is all. So they came back to me and I said, yeah, you're right. That is a whole. Okay. So why don't we move this here and we'll do it like this, and let's bring the armor down to this. And everybody went, oh, okay. And so they worked it out. But that was a collaborative process, and everything we do is collaborative. And it's great because the people involved get to do really cool things, and I get to hang out with it too and do my cool things. So, I always feel a little stupid if people say, gee, autograph everything because you did it, because all these guys helped do it. They were all there helping, plus a bunch of guys you may never say. It's like Dave Ackerman, who's at our booth now, and Ed Bolme did an amazing amount of work in Cyberpunk originally. And they deserve a chunk of credit too for it, because I couldn't have done it without them. I kind of lead the charge and dodge out of the way, and things get crazy. And that's why things work with CD, is, again, we're doing collaborative stuff.
Also want to mention James Hutt.
James Hutt.
Who worked on Red. He cannot be here with us.
James is holding down the fort.
He is the lone man holding down the fort in our Talsorian dungeon.
Yeah, poor James.
James spent a lot of nights sleeping on the couch in our office.
Well, he just likes to sleep on the couch.
Admittedly, we've got a comfy couch.
We have this really in the back end of the warehouse section. We have this incredibly comfy couch that Lisa bought just because we're used to long hauls on things. And James made it his office. It's like, we're going to have to uproot him or get a new couch.
But you'll see names. You'll see his name. You'll see Mike's name. You'll see Dave's name. You'll see Cody's name. You'll even see my name.
Yep.
I'm quite excited about that. And you'll see Jay's name, of course, and our retail consultant and product consultant, Aaron Tarbuck. What's the last name?
Tarbuck. It's like Starbuck.
Tarbuck. Thank you. And of course, Lisa Pondsmith, who without which it would not. She performed. He's talking about how you have to have all your pieces shipped from all over the world to make your thing.
Oh
she
my
did
God.
that.
Oh God, you should have seen the process we went
from
to.
Poland, books from Seattle,
She
boxes
writes the
from.
contracts.
Yeah.
She makes the business work. She's amazing and terrifying.
Yep.
She is.
She invented the bozos.
She may be the smallest great white shark on the planet. So what we're going to do now, because we have about 20 minutes left, we're going to open up the floor to questions. Again, there's only so many questions that Patrick can answer, but we'll be happy to see what we can do. And I already see a hand. So we'll go first to the blue sweater in the back.
Would you mind standing up so we can hear you a little bit better?
Yeah, and please
And
loudly
we can
so the
get.
microphone can
Okay,
be-
good. I've got beat on her now.
Hi, sorry.
Oh, we like you.
We do.
What can you tell us about the romances in the romance option?
Need to know the important stuff.
Very good question. It's a very good question. I can't confirm any specific characters, but I really hope that there's a wide variety of options that people will really enjoy and that will be resonant with people. And they're good looking too. So maybe.
The crew back in Warsaw really kind of likes to ship by themselves too. So
And they're all good looking in Warsaw. It's really.
Let me put it this way:
It is
about
a
the
little bit.
third thing that people asked me when I first went out there and we were looking, the scene over was, so Alt and Johnny, are they still together? I'm going, I have never had any of the people who want to do this ask me that question. I'm going, okay, these guys really care.
Okay, so we're gonna go there, and then we'll move back over here. So next to the very long row of ribbons. Yeah, that's you. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
So, from the demos, we've seen the character's V.
Mhm.
That's the nickname for the character. We've seen that they seem to be a lot like a solo or fixer
Mhm.
in the demos. Is that just for for the demos, or are we going to see if you maybe run into other like class-like features? Like
Well,
Netrunner?
what we use, and you will see more when the gameplay finally comes up. But what we have is we have a kind of a fluid class system, and it's kind of solo base, but really we have 3 classes, and they are the techie, the solo, and the netrunner, and you sort of blend them together. Most of what we've shown so far is shooting, so that's very solo. But of course, fixers can shoot, and netrunners can shoot, and in Red. We have very similar netrunners to the kind that are in Red as well, which is different from the netrunners back in 2020, where you could be in a bathtub 6 miles away doing your own thing. What we have is we have netrunners. You really have to be on the ground because the internet's blown the hell up. It's ruined. It's very dangerous to use. If you try to plug in from 6 miles away, it's going to be really hard for you. It takes a real expert to do that.
It does, and this is actually one of the fun things. Was I realized the net was like a pain in the butt for a lot of people to fit into campaigns. So I actually went to a couple of friends of mine who specialize in cybersecurity and said, "Tell me how I can fuck it up." and one of them kind of rubbed his hands together and said, "Oh, I'm going to enjoy this." So basically, what we did was found a way to mess up the net and make it personal by essentially knocking everything down to infranets and really, really small internal networks, and then air gapping, as they call it, which is to say, it's somewhere you can't reach unless you go there. And that was one of the best parts of getting the net down. And it, weirdly enough, we had done that, and then Patrick comes back to me and says, "We need to do this with the net." And I'm going, "Yeah, we were thinking about doing that too." And it's like, "Okay, sold. We're good."
Yeah.
We could talk about net running.
We
forever.
really could. There could be all center of that. So the gentleman with the swoopy red hair.
I just wanted to thank you for following the lore and not just running roughshod over it.
No, I agree.
I know where they live.
Detail and the fact that you even talked to the creator and not just, "Hey, we're going to pay you for these rights. Goodbye."
Yeah.
Which we've all seen done to so many backgrounds and lore just to literally be walked and trashed. It just, as both a video gamer and a role player, it is just amazing. This collaboration, as Mike called it earlier, is just amazing. And as someone who's been a fan since the 80s, I'm just so happy to see this level of attention to detail. And the fact that you would ask, "Hey, what about this character? No, how about this other?" I mean, just hearing that, I just know this game is so amazing.
I'm glad to hear that. The thing is we didn't want to buy the franchise just to ruin it, right? Like, we didn't want to do that.
They were fans.
We're fans, and we like Mike. We like Mike, and we don't want to.
I'm not too obnoxious.
The last time we were in Poland, I got to go, yay, and it was a lot like being at a con because every once in a while someone would run up to Mike with a copy, this battered old Polish copy of 2020, which, by the way, the Polish copy, as far as I know, is the only one with the Cyberpunk logo in yellow and not red.
Yeah. Which is why it's yellow in the.
And they say, "Your book changed my life. Can you please sign it?"
All right, cool.
So there's a lot of fans there too, and it shows in the work. So we're gonna move over to this side of the room. So we're gonna do the gentleman right there, and then the gentleman in the gray sweatshirt.
Are you able to talk either in Red or in 2077 about the humanity system?
I'm finally going to have to. Okay, I'll go to it to some depth. I'm not going to. We could be there for days philosophically. Okay, start this off by I have a degree in clinical psychology, so I don't pull that out of nowhere. It's actually experience. That being said, original Humanity Lost was a game mechanic as well, but it struck me as a really interesting thing that when you voluntarily cut off your left arm for no reason, there's something going on in your head, because, when I got people who did self, harm in some way or another, as in my case situations, I would be going, yeah, I'm supposed to be curing this. This is not necessarily good. And it isn't that you can go down to, the local, body shop and have it done. It's the act of deciding to change yourself at that level. And what that fundamentally says is your status mentally when you go into it is very important. So Humanity Lost, and we talk about this a lot in Red, implies already that people who do this, some of them are already having issues that the cyberware kind of masks. and they have dissociative situations with their own bodies. They have, issues going on. So not everybody gets cyberpsychosis. And humanity represents your balance in your head and how you see yourself in the rest of the world. It's not just a number.
And we've made a point in Red to speak on the fact that humanity loss comes from the willingness to get the cyberware. If you're in a gunfight and your hand is blown off and you have to replace your hand, that is not the same situation as if you have a perfectly functioning hand, but you want a hand that has a screwdriver in it.
Yeah.
So you have your hand cut off.
Well, it is a question of volition.
Likewise, a pacemaker is not going to make you less human or take you off the path. Neither will gender correction.
Yeah, gender change, correction surgeries and things like that are bringing you into line to where you want to be and where your head really is. So it's actually helpful rather than a problem. Also, one of the things which we'll get into a lot more in Red, I always want to do this with Cyberpunk period, is you don't just have to go through losing, body parts and cyberware and so forth like that. You also can be driven into cyberpsychosis by many other things that create trauma and PTSD and so forth. So shock, horrible things going on around you, those will also have effects on you in the Red side of the series. So you may be, rock steady in terms of, I balance my cyberware really well, and I've got my numbers and I'm good, and I just watched somebody eat a baby. And because the environment we're talking about, somebody in a review the other day said, that world is a terrifying world. Yeah. And it's a terrifying world. I've lived in places where, I expected gangs to shoot at me at any given point and stuff like that, and packed a large hardware to make sure that didn't happen. But I had control of the situation. A world where there's really no cops, where life is incredibly cheap. That's a frightening world, and it's going to bend you. It's going to be like living in a war zone. So, summing up in humanity is a question of volition. It is based on issues that may already be inherent in your character, but we don't break it out entirely. And it may be affected by other things other than the application of cyberware.
And as I recall, in 2077, you have stated, you haven't, I think the official rule is you can't really talk about it beyond the fact that
V as a character won't have a humanity score, and we don't really have a use for humanity and cyberpsychosis as a game mechanic. But we do have it in sort of the story, in the world. It does exist. The most I could say about it is at least the way that we tend to think about it is that it's about your willingness to turn yourself into a weapon, right? And if you are willing to turn yourself into a weapon, there's probably an underlying reason for that. And
it's like the sequence in the first trailer with the girl, who just come out of the opera, I think it was, or something. And she's, pool of blood. No one stops at any point to go, why does this girl have 3-foot daggers in her arms?
And assumedly, incredibly powerful skin weave.
So when you're looking at it, one of the things I always love is the juxtaposition of that and going, there had to be something kind of weird there to say, I'm going to put large killing katanas in my arms. Yeah. So I'm not just cutting off my arm. I'm beautiful, but I'm cutting my arm off today. And I'm going to put large sharp blades, and I'm going to take and underlie my skin with metal.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think about yourself at that point? What do you think about when you got up in the morning, you say, hey, I've got really, really sharp mantis blades. I think I'll kill somebody today. You didn't do that.
Yeah.
But you were thinking somewhere at a level that you weren't real and the people around you weren't necessarily real.
Yeah, we have actually in 2077, because sort of the timeline of it is, we're coming back to technology, we're coming back to this new age. We actually have a lot of full Borgs that look fully human, like the girl in the trailer, or if you saw the other trailer, the lady takes her face off and things like that. We have a lot of people who are essentially full conversions, and they don't go cyber psycho. It's not about changing the body necessarily. It's about it's about the weaponry. It's about the capacity to kill and the willingness to do so.
Yeah, and basically how you relate to those things.
Yeah.
There and then there.
So I hate to give a person analysis, but it came up. So if proposals are concerned for red or confirmed for red, are they confirmed for 27?
No comment.
No comment.
All right. Good enough.
So, coming out, especially having such a big actor release for working it, Cyberpunk history and lore is finally being seen of like, oh, it's not just a video game, there's something else going. So for the younger generation that's coming into it, or the older generation, several of my friends that were not really tabletop or role-playing gamers, but they're like, oh my gosh, there's all this history, and now they want to go back. How much lore and history is going to be provided in the game to get those newer players going?
Quite a bit. One of the projects that I'm actually working on, it's been announced, so I can mention it, is in the collector's edition. There's a booklet that actually details sort of the history of Night City, and we're trying to take all of that information, whether or not that is going to be available in the game as well, but all of that information we want to be in the game. That said, we also want to make sure that the game is accessible to people coming in knowing nothing about it, and part of that is making sure that all of the information that you need to understand the world, all the exposition, is handled diegetically, directly in the game to the player. Here's what you need to know, and here's why you need to know it. But if you go in with additional information, you're also going to see a lot of things. You're going to pick up on a lot of nuance that you otherwise wouldn't know. You'll get the jokes. You'll see the street name, and you'll go, "Oh, right, okay." Exactly.
And to go back to one of the original discussion topics, that is one reason why Red exists as well, because we had to write Red in a way where people could get all these years of history that many older players know. And we also expected that there were going to be people who would get the game and go, wow, I really, there was more here. And they would read what Patrick had written and go, there's even more here. And we had to start a slide, a way that people could get even more information without it being a textbook.
Yeah, something that I would really love to see is, it would just give me great satisfaction, is people who know nothing about Cyberpunk coming into Cyberpunk 2077, playing it, and then immediately going and buying either Red or the classic books because they want to know more. They want to, they saw something cool, they want to know more about it. So there's, the game is full of those things. We always make sure to tell you what you need to know, but there's also more stuff that you'll be able to pick up from the books. Yeah.
This applies to both Red and 2077. I expect an answer from one, not from the other. One of the unsung heroes of 2020, in my opinion, are the digital librarians. Is this a group that were in their goal of saving the information that's being lost? With everything that's happening after the Fourth Corporate War, do the digital librarians show up in Red? Do they still exist? Are they still on their mission? And would that be something that would translate to later on in the time zone?
He can answer that. I can't.
Okay. I would say no comment, but one of the things that happens in the war is that, and we talk about it in the core Cyberpunk line, is Viral 15, which is essentially a paper reading virus, which I used to also work as a librarian. So we had to do a lot of archival stuff to keep rare books from eating themselves. So one of the problems the digital librarians would have anyway was preserving that. So they are actually preserving it. However, they are not as prevalent in the main line as they were, for example, in the Cyberpunk novels that were out. They, basically on those novels, the writer ran with it much further than we ever intended. Yeah.
I can't say this is canon, but I could definitely see agents of a group like that falling in with the Reclaimers.
Yes.
And that's what made me think of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have.
I got a whole book planned for the Reclaimers.
And over there with the headband. Okay. And we'll go back to you after that.
This is for Mike. Have you considered doing a 2020 Cyberpunk 2020 collector's edition, like a hardcover collector's edition?
Oh yeah.
We are saying.
We are.
Okay.
We are. Yeah. We're saying that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I add on to that? What about Silver?
What? You mean the book?
Yes. Because it was mentioned previously. And
Yeah.
This time, I mean, it was actually like
Part of it is we're sorting out time stuff. We have to both keep up with what we have. Let's put it this way: when Alliance Distribution, for example, put our lines in for Cyberpunk alone, it was like 2 fricking pages. You open up Cyberpunk, whoa. So we have to keep that. We have to get all the new stuff that's coming in. We have to time that. So if we do a special edition, it's going to be a little bit of time before we actually decide on when to bring it in.
So the blue trainer and then the red trainer.
So last year you threatened a data bomb. Somebody was going in moving information.
Oh, that's already happened. That's Bart Moss, baby.
Yeah,
In fact, the guy who actually did most of the major writing on Race and scares me because he can do Race so well is down in our booth right now, Ed Bolnay. And yeah, Ed can shift over to Race in a heartbeat. No, what most people don't. Okay, a lot of things I write in the background are things that are set up like bombs, and you have to put 2 or 3 things together. The data crash was basically worked like this. Race Bart Moss has always believed that information should be free, and he doesn't like corporations, and he hates NetWatch. So he sat down, and when the IG transformations that ran the net were established, he basically hacked in and was there in the construct platform. Basically, you often have when you're building a game, you have a build, the build engine where you're doing stuff. He got in there, and so they were putting the thing together, and he was over in the corner, and he just dropped a bunch of backdoors in on it. And the code was so massive, they never noticed. So with these backdoors, he set things up, and over the next 10 years, he went through and he built this program, and his entire job was to pick up a piece of information, flag it, pick up a location, flag it, and then set it up so that it's a certain time, information would be copied from here, written there, and deleted there. And it would just jump all over the place. And that way he totally screwed things up. And again, I went back to my friends, plus that was the level of code I understood. So I went, can we do this? Yeah, I can do this. And Frank said, my friend Frank said, oh yeah, I could do it. I'd be fired like for a billion years, but I could do it.
And there's the rabbits.
And then to make sure that no one noticed, he also created the rabbits. And rabbits were a really, really powerful black ice that only had one thing. It showed up, looked like rage, and it basically tried to kill you. And it was a multi-stack demon, so it had a lot of ways to kill you. And he cut that loose. And the whole thing was, he figured if he wrecked the net, he would wreck corporate power for good. And that's why in 2077 and in Red, you don't go flying through the net anymore, because between the rabbits, the background stuff that you're dealing with of trying to find information. I used to say, you're a housewife, you go to get your cookie recipe, there's a Militech battle tank's plans in there instead. Where are my cookies? Well, honey, why don't we make a battle tank? Oh, I don't know. That's kind of large for the oven. That was mentioned, Dad, mom with the pearls. So the thing that Rach didn't plan for was that Arasaka sooner or later figured out what was going on, that data was being messed with. Because all through the war, the data crash is moving things constantly. And Arasaka went and said, hey, we're a security company. You've noticed all the people we protect are getting their shit moved. Okay. So they decided to do Viral 14 and mess up hard copies as much as possible, so that when it all got down to it, they would say, oh, we're the only people who really know what the hell's going on. We have all the books you need. We have all the information and so forth. Ha, 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 ha. Except they got blown up.
As I recall, that particular master database was
Yes,
in a certain tower.
That was in the tower, in a certain city, in a certain place, on a certain floor.
Yeah, it's the gentleman in the back. Thank you for being patient.
So, as someone who's new to the universe of Cyberpunk, I generally find that it's easiest for me to dive into the world of novels and stuff like that. Is there any plans for new novels, or is it mostly going to be in source books, and specifically for Red or even 2077?
I'd love to do it. Still working on the idea. We had licensed novels, and BitBoy and
Do not read them.
Yeah, we
I thought they were great.
our lights basically our agents came to us and said Time Warner wants to do books, and we said, oh, okay, cool, let's do. And you got BitBoy and Data Girl. Okay, no. So we want to at some point. We'd love to do books. Nothing right now on the schedule because we have to go put that in place.
I believe in the back of 2020 there's a list of novels.
Yeah, check the list of novels. There's some excellent novels that you can check things out on.
Plus, it should be mentioned that we have like some 40 something supplements for Cyberpunk, and the way we tend to write products, there are a lot of bits of lore and also a lot of bits of fiction written into those products.
We try really hard to make it read like a fun novel too.
There's hardly any gameplay in the Night City source book. It's just like it's like picking up a Fodor's Guide to a City.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
I sat down with Fodor's, I sat down with the Rough Guide, and I said, "This is what I want."
Copies at the booth still, but they're
1852.
well, they're just
So for someone getting into the
Top three supplements to get into it.
For lore.
Can I? Can
Yes.
I do this?
Yes.
Do it.
Take that one.
I would go Night City, Home of the Brave, and
Forlorn Hope.
I mean, I
If
love
I were-
Forlorn Hope.
If I wanted lots of stuff, It depends on how interested I am in Europe and the Pacific.
Yeah, that's the question. Do you want Europe, the Pacific, or honestly, you know what? I'm going to go with
Space.
Mike here, and actually, I'm going to go with Forlorn Hope. But Deep Space is also very good.
Forlorn Hope.
I can't
is
limit
good.
myself to 3.
Yeah, Forlorn Hope. The thing is, it's important because it's the first one that talks about the old Southam Wars, and you see people who are solos and runners and everything living in an environment day to day. So it's like Cheers with death.
It's the bar where everyone knows your name. There's a Ripper Doc in the basement, and the guy in the back picks your gun.
Yeah.
No, everybody doesn't know your name. They know your analysts. They know your name. They
Go
kill
there,
you.
and then the last question will be there.
Patrick, I'm glad you mentioned it's like my favorite.
It's fantastic. I love it.
So one of the best things about Homewood is it's so granular and specific
Mhm.
about the evolution of American culture from the time of the collapse
Mhm.
until 2020. And part of why it's so good is because it feels so true to life.
Mhm.
So, for you guys as like the story team, as CD Projekt, and for the team at Talsorian, how do you guys go about kind of like researching and like understanding and putting yourselves in the mindset of like people who live through these like extreme circumstances?
Mhm.
It's like, how do you kind of like make that feel real?
Well, you want it first, or shall I jump it?
You can go first.
Okay,
And I'll
let
follow up.
me step in the minefield.
Sure.
Okay, no, I do a ridiculous amount of research, and when we order or we get writers for a place, for example, the game book for Southeast Asia, okay, and Asia, we get people who live in those places. Even Poland, before we knew them, we got people who lived in Poland who write. I really hate to have something written by someone who's not a native of that place because they know things I'm never going to know. Sometimes it gets interesting because we'll write something and then somebody else will write to us and go, "It's not like that here." And I'm going, well, you can argue, but we got somebody who we trust their judgment that it is like this on the ground. So that's one, get people there. 2, again, I do a ridiculous amount of research. I read, net stuff and, if you took a look on my phone, you'd find at least 600 different books. And of them, about half of them are going to be examinations of technology, history, foreign policy and studies and things like that. I want to know how the world works so I can talk about it.
actually, I have to add to that, Mike, because you also surround yourself with things that will remind you of those places too physically.
Yeah.
In your home and your surroundings, I've noticed that. And even like if he's studying something about somewhere else, he'll even like start looking at recipes about that and cooking that kind of food. And why are they eating these kinds of food, and it leads them on this very long journey that's it's really immersive.
Which is the fun part. I have a job that gives me an excuse to do what I would have done anyway, but I get paid for it now. But it is really interesting. You know, she's talked about things like I was working at one point on a game that was going to be taking place in the South Seas, and I went out and bought like Polynesian weapons. So I'm in there with my Shark Tooth Club. Oh, that feels like this.
He had like the tropical flowers in his vase, and like he just had all of this stuff all around him, and just cooking koi. And
He has different typewriters depending on, or different keyboards depending on what game he's working on.
I do. I actually do. But the thing is that you have to. I use an analogy, which is to write something well. It's like basically eating a pound of dough and a couple pounds of mozzarella and some Parmesan and half a dozen tomatoes and a handful of spices, and you eat that and then you throw up a pizza. Which is, say, you bring all these things into yourself and you look at them and you say, how do you shape this to be a coherent narrative that other people will be interested in following? Mm-hmm. And I think, my part of the team, because everybody contributes, my part of the team is I'm very good at putting that coherent narrative together and then handing it off and working with people so they can see how that works. Night City, I know that place more than the back of my hand. I walk it every night in my head. But the trick is getting Patrick to see it as well. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There was one point where, we were getting the project rolling and the main team was rolling on. And Adam I was over in Poland, had me come over in Poland and talk to the entire studio. So I'm in this room with at that point, about 200 people?
Probably about
200. And I'm explaining them what it's like to be in that world. And because they needed to do that and they wanted to get a feel. And that's my job is I live there. I know it. And at the end of it, I figured, okay, that's done. And then Adam said, good. Well, tomorrow we're going to go over to this town. And I'm like, what? We have another studio. And I'm going, so you're saying I get on a train and do this all over again? Mm-hmm. And I did, because my job is to basically take that synthesis of what makes a place or an environment or a culture work and communicate it clearly to the people who are going to read or use it.
Mm-hmm. I've received a lot of that treatment, actually.
We're going to do one last question because I'm sure there are people waiting for
Patrick,
Patrick's
got something to say.
I was going to add to that.
Back, you fiend.
Yeah.
I will release my dragon.
I was just going to say, for our part, it's similar, though spread across many more people, and individual quest designers or writers will be the caretakers of certain subjects, and they'll be the ones to do the research, to read the books. We also work with a lot of outside consultants. You've probably heard in our gameplay demo, we have a Haitian Creole community in it, and we made sure that to hire consultants who spoke Creole, who knew Haitian culture and Haitian religion, so that they could give us details, like how does it actually work? Like, are we doing this right? We want to do a thing. Does this work? Does any of this make sense? And we get their feedback. And we've worked with other consultants in a similar way. And so, yeah, it's that. And then for my part, as one of the few Americans on the narrative team, it's my job to sort of understand 2020 and why 2020 is constructed the way that it is, and why all the bits fit together in certain ways, and then to communicate that to a mostly European team, to sort of say, like, okay, here's this element of Cyberpunk. Why is it built this way? Like, why does Trauma Team work the way that Trauma Team does? Well, because actually the way that Trauma Team is constructed in 2020 is it's saying this, it's also saying this, it also has this element in it and this element in it, and this is why it works. And you put it together and then you explain it to them and they go, oh, okay, now I get it. And then they know how to use it properly and know which parts they can change and which parts they shouldn't change. And
Yeah, I find it fascinating is that people at one point, when they first saw the first 2077 stuff, they went, it looks like Los Angeles and this, and I stopped and I said, guys, realize that you've got a bunch of guys in Poland who have done a really believable simulation of Southern California.
Yeah.
They've nailed it. I looked at it and said, yeah, I know that place. Yeah.
We actually have an office there. We actually have
one
an office
last
there. They
question,
travel there.
and
Yeah.
then we do need to break down and get going. So yes, please.
So there's a section in the JumpStart kit called Sasquatch is Watching.
Sasquatch is watching.
Federation is essentially letting petrochem kind of
Yeah, Biotechnica.
Biotech,
Yeah.
Who are the good guy corporation?
in
here.
trying to introduce things into the ecology,
Mhm.
fix it. Can you elaborate at all how that?
This dragon snake is going to end up there.
That would be cool.
Basically, what I looked at was all these years. My wife is, as she says, I'm an original tree hugger, and so I look at the fact that with new technologies, you can create and you can restructure things. We talk about like GMO food and stuff like that, but we have been genetically modifying crop foods forever. And I love the fact that no one ever thinks that anymore. So what I see is if you have a company that thinks of itself as a good guy and they want to experiment, they're going to make things, but they also know those things are going to be vulnerable. But, if pandas could suddenly rear up on their hind legs and rip your lungs out with laser beams in their eyes, nobody would go move them out of their bamboo forests.
Mike is not saying there are pandas that can rear up on their hind legs and rip laser beams in their eyes in the game.
Oh,
that was
damn, I said that. Yeah. But seriously, yeah, one of the things I was interested in was if, a corporation doesn't have to always make cyberware. A corporation doesn't always have to make technology. They can make biotechnology. And taking out in the field, that could be kind of interesting. Yeah. And they may never think about what comes of it. Remember, Jurassic Park, most of the paleontologists I know secretly want that.
There's a poem I'll actually recommend to you, All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace.
Yes.
Just Google it. The thing is the word cyber comes from Greek, meaning helmsman, and it means the person who is in charge. And it doesn't just apply to our bodies. It doesn't just mean plugging metal into our bodies, but it also means changing the environment and controlling the environment. And sort of the thing about cyberpunk is an examination of some of the horrifying implications of that. Because if you give that kind of power to a system whereby you have giant mega corporations in control of everything, what are you going to get? You're going to get a horror show. So yeah.
And it may be a well-intentioned horror show.
Yeah.
Jay had a parting comment.
I do. I'm always looking for artists. If you are in the audience, if you're an artist, or if you have if you have any friends that you'd like to refer, I will look at anybody.
Anyone at home?
I will give advice to anybody if they just want to talk about advice. I'm super open to helping people figure out their portfolio, or if they're ready to actually present to me, just please let me know. You can find me at the booth, and I will meet with people tomorrow.
And if I could say something as well.
Yes, of course.
The fact that you put the names of the artists on the things, you mentioned it earlier, is fantastic. And the artists of CD Projekt, like I sent the Red Kit out to people, and I had a number of artists come up to me and say, "This is fantastic! Like, I love that you've done that."
Oh.
So I wanted to pass that along.
That's why we love Jay.
So that's it. I want to thank everyone for coming.
Thank you.
We will have a very small number of JumpStart kits at our booth tomorrow morning. You want to be there. They're going to be gone very quickly. Yeah. They will be in stores as soon as possible. They are available digitally online now. It's everything but the dice, and you got to print it yourself if you want it on paper. But it's also $15 cheaper.
Jay, when you say as soon as possible, is it like 30 days, 45 days? I mean, is there
as soon as possible?
Yeah.
And other than that, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your support. You're wonderful.
Thanks.